So we know what interfaces are. We know that they're a place in between two subjects, two things, that simplifies the way those two things interact. And in the case of our main activity, it's a simple way that a button can interact with an activity or a fragment, the view on-click listener. The button doesn't need to know any of the inner workings of the activity. It just needs to know that that is an on-click listener. Okay, so that's what an interface is. We've seen a few reasons why they're important: hiding the underlying code, making sure the button can't access the whole activity and do dangerous things, and also that anything could be a button click listener, an activity, a fragment. And in the last tutorial, we saw a few different ways of how we can implement an interface. Make a brand new class file, make the main activity class itself be the interface, and we finally learned that very scary, complicated sounding concept of anonymous classes, which explained all that new .view on-click listener code we saw a long time ago in Java. But we now understand what's happening there. We're just making a new class that extends an interface in line, right there in the code, without having to name it. That's where the word anonymous comes from. So if I go ahead now and remove our two buttons, we're now faced with a choice of what we do with our bottom navigation view. If we just go ahead and get reference to our bottom navigation view, so binding.bottomNav, and we saw a few tutorials ago that the method we need is .setOnNavigationItemSelectedListener. And rather than going with a shortcut one, that lambda, those curly brackets that kind of do it all for us, we'll go with this top one that is expecting the interface. And as we can see, that's expecting a listener of bottomNavigationView.onNavigationItemSelectedListener. So we know that we're not going to go ahead and make a brand new file separate to main activity and implement that interface there. That's going to have the major problem of giving us no access to the things we need in main activity. So we're either going to pass in the word this and make main activity implement it, or we're going to do one of these anonymous classes. Well, I mentioned for buttons that if you have more than one button on the screen, it's not always ideal to say this main activity is the interface, because in that case you'd only have one on-click method in activity, and if you had multiple buttons, that method would grow and grow and grow. You'd have to have a different if-else-if block for every single button, checking its ID. Well, let's just think about our user interface and our user experience on Android. Pretty much 99.9% of the time, if you have a bottom navigation view on your screen, you're only going to have one. There's only going to be one bottom navigation view, so that problem of multiple different bottom navigation views sharing the same listener isn't really a problem. We can type in the word this, which refers to this instance of main activity, this object. So we'll say this, and we're getting an error, and that error says we require an on-navigation-item-selected-listener, but we only found main activity. And this leads to one of my all-time favorite ways to use an error to do a shortcut. If you do Alt-Enter, Option-Enter, and the bottom one says, let main activity implement the interface. I love this shortcut. Go ahead and select that one and press Enter. Make sure you select the on-navigation-item method and press OK. And that does two things. It sticks the method in for us, you can see there, override on-navigation-item-selected, and it also does the comma and adds the interface. So that's a really useful shortcut, okay? But we now have the method we need in main activity. I can delete the to-do. We can see that the on-navigation-item-selected method needs to return a boolean. I'll explain why very shortly. For now, I'll just return true. We'll talk about what that does in just a moment. Now, this is my preferred way of implementing an interface, which is only going to be used once in a main activity. Actually, having this method in the activity, on navigation item selected, to me it reads really nicely. I can see in my activity, here's the space where the navigation is handled. That's really nice to me. For my buttons, if I just scroll up a little bit, I do the shortcut way, that lambda, which is a shortcut to our anonymous class. I do this for our buttons. Usually, even if I only have one button, I still do this, because I like to see the code for the button in line. I often refer to a specific method, like on running clicked and on cycling clicked. So this kind of shortcut of using the lambda, using the anonymous class shorthand here, and then directing immediately to a method, this kind of allows me to have very small methods for each individual button. That's my preferred approach, even with just one button. But for the bottom navigation view, I like to just pass in this, make the main activity implement the interface, and then override that method, the on navigation item selected. I should just show you for comparison what the choice would be. If I remove this, and I remove the interface from the main activity, so this won't work. The other possibility is to do that anonymous class. I could do object, implements, bottom navigation view dot on navigation selected listener, making sure it says selected and not reselected, okay? Then I'll do the curly brackets as if I'm doing a class, and then I will use the error in the object, so implement members on navigation item selected. You can do this, that's okay to do, but it can start looking a bit messy to me that. Of course, the object syntax is a little bit messy. I can use their suggestion to make it into lambda, that shorthand. Okay, if I just put that on a new line, you can see there's this strange it thing. So it is actually a variable, which is the menu item, which is how we're going to know what's been clicked on. And you can actually name it if you want. You can do something like menu item, and this arrow syntax, which I will show you later on in the course, is a feature of this lambda thing, that we kind of get a variable of any of the parameters in our method. So we get this it variable, but you have the permission to name it if you want. So we can say my menu item variable name, do the arrow, and then you can start doing things with that, like getting the ID. Okay, so it's possible to do the lambda, the shorthand, but actually I really, really like doing this, letting the activity implement the interface, and then having the method right there in my main activity. So please, for this tutorial, do what I've done and do this and make main activity implement the interface, okay? And then we will do the method in the main activity file. Later on, as you develop your career as an Android developer and make your own projects or roll out solutions for a company you might work for, you will have choice as to which way you go about doing it. And I've seen many projects which do it as an anonymous class. And there's a strange syntax where you don't type the word return in a lambda. Okay, so there's a few little things like that, and the menu item thing that I showed you, where you can call it what you want. There's a few little weird quirks, which to me can make it a bit complicated, especially to new developers. It's kind of okay for our button click listeners. But yeah, I don't recommend this approach if you're a beginner, but feel free to use this if you'd like later on, or if indeed later on, if you see some code which does this approach, at least you know what's going on. It's an anonymous class, okay? But that's pretty much all we need to do to have the main activity respond to navigation clicks. The main activity is the interface. It is the listener. We filled out the contract. So the last thing to do is to do our clever bit of code to switch to the different fragments, our two existing methods, depending on what's been clicked. So let's delete the button running click listener. Now we finally have our bottom nav working. And we'll do a couple of if statements to detect which bottom navigation item's been selected. So we can do if, and then brackets, and we'll say if the item, this menu item, you can see we have that passed into us by the bottom navigation view. If the item's item ID, and if you remember in our menu file we have some IDs. If I do shift, and I just type the word bottom nav, and you can see here the top one, bottom underscore nav from our menu folder. If we just jump into this file, we gave the running icon an ID of nav underscore running, cycling an ID of nav underscore cycling, so we have access to this in this menu item. If the item.itemID equals r.id.navcycling, we can do something. Else, if the item.itemID equals r.running, we can do something. Else, if for some reason it's some completely different ID which we're not expecting, we should do something else. So this is how we're going to be able to detect which icon's been clicked on. So if they select cycling, let's do the on cycling clicked method. If they've done on running, we'll do the on running clicked method. We are still getting an error saying at the very bottom, it's expected that we return something. But it will return true. New item that when we go to the find our run the app on the emulator, we can see we have our running fragment by default because it's in the fragment containers layout code. And when I click on the different items in the bottom navigation view, they switch out the fragment. If I just move the emulator over a little bit, main activity is implementing the interface. Main activity is fulfilling the contract that promises I can handle bottom navigation clicks. It's the interface. We say this, and then we implement that behavior here. The bottom navigation view, when it's clicked, will give us the item that was clicked. We can inspect the item's ID. If it's cycling, we can do our cycling switching code. If it's running, we can do our running switching code. And we return true to say, yes, please highlight the icon for those two. But if it's anything else, then no, please don't highlight the icon. We're not expecting that. And that is all we need to do to get the bottom navigation view responding to clicks perfectly. And we now have done this by fully understanding what interfaces are, why they're important, and the few different ways of how we can go about implementing them. So we're now ready to start developing our fragment layouts and start making this app look awesome.